For 22 years, one man ruled Arsenal with a quiet, unshakable calm. Arsène Wenger, the professor, the visionary, the manager who turned a London club into the immortal Invincibles. He almost never raised his voice. He almost never named names. But behind that gentleman's smile were battles the cameras rarely caught, dressing room revolts, on-pitch tantrums, and stars who tested his patience to breaking point. Wenger signed over 200 players in North London. He built legends. He also lived through betrayals, meltdowns, and public feuds that nearly tore his squad apart. Today, we're counting down 5 of the most turbulent relationships of his entire career. The players who clashed with him, defied him, and in some cases left hating everything he stood for. Some of these names will shock you. Others you'll recognize the moment we say them. But you won't believe how far it actually went. Let's begin. Before continuing, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos. And tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. The captain who sat down, his name was William Gallas, and he was supposed to be a leader. When Thierry Henry left for Barcelona in 2007, Wenger needed a new captain. He made a surprising choice. The tough, gifted French defender he'd signed from Chelsea in the deal that sent Ashley Cole the other way. It was a gamble. Even inside the dressing room, eyebrows were raised. Jens Lehmann later admitted the players all shook our heads when they learned of it from the newspapers, given how often Gallas had turned up late or walked out of training. Then came February 23, 2008. Birmingham City. Arsenal, top of the league, were seconds from victory when a late penalty was conceded. And Gallas, the captain, the armband on his sleeve, snapped. He lashed out at the advertising boards, then marched to the halfway line and sat down on the grass, alone, refusing to look as Birmingham equalized. Wenger himself had to walk back onto the pitch and escort his own captain off, like a parent collecting a child mid-tantrum. Arsenal's title challenge collapsed from that day. Months later, Gallas gave an interview criticizing the team's younger players for lacking courage, and Wenger stripped him of the captaincy, handing it to Cesc Fabregas. It was one of the most public breakdowns of Wenger's reign. And yet, here's the twist that leads us to a bigger theme. Years later, Gallas said of him, "Before being a great manager, he is a great human." Because with Wenger, the storm was rarely the whole story. The one who walked away in love. Most people expected a villain here. Instead, we get a heartbreak. Cesc Fabregas arrived as a 16-year-old boy from Barcelona's academy in 2003. Under Wenger, he became something extraordinary. Captain at just 21, a fan favorite whose name echoed around the Emirates, one of the most creative midfielders in Europe. 8 years, 304 appearances. Wenger didn't just manage him, he raised him. What makes Fabregas different is that this wasn't a fallout. It was a slow, aching separation. Barcelona came calling, and after months of open flirtation with his boyhood club, Fabregas went on strike and forced his exit in 2011, leaving under a cloud. But the real wound came later. When Fabregas eventually became available again, Wenger, with Mesut Ozil already in the building, chose not to bring his former captain home. And so, Fabregas did the unthinkable to Arsenal supporters. He signed for Chelsea. The enemy. The player they'd adored now wore blue. It felt like a betrayal, and fans were furious. But the deeper truth is that Wenger let him go with his eyes open. This wasn't hatred. It was the cold arithmetic of a manager who'd learned you can love a player and still close the door, which brings us to a man who felt that door slam far harder than anyone. The one who learned to hate him. "Now I hate them for the way Wenger treated me." Those are the real words of Gervinho, the flying, unpredictable Ivorian winger who arrived in 2011 chasing a childhood dream. He'd grown up loving Arsenal. He wanted to be there, and it fell apart completely. What made Gervinho so different was the gap between his talent and his confidence. An instinctive dribbler capable of the spectacular, he could beat 3 men and then miss an open goal. Over 63 matches, just 11 goals. And under the bright lights of the Emirates, that fragility only grew. Wenger, for his part, was honest about it. He explained that he sold Gervinho precisely because the player performed with a lack of confidence. A creative, instinctive footballer who needed belief he simply couldn't summon in North London. But Gervinho took it personally. Speaking later in Italy, thriving under a manager who talked to everyone in the squad and not just the starting 11, he unloaded, saying Wenger never trusted him, and that the treatment turned his boyhood love into something closer to resentment. He'd go on to score 26 goals at Roma, proving the talent was always there. It's the saddest kind of clash. Not anger, but a dream that curdled, and it was far from the only time Wenger's methods came back to haunt him. The legends who turned on him. Here's the quality that defined Wenger, and eventually isolated him, his fierce, almost stubborn independence. For all his greatness, Wenger managed titans: Patrick Vieira, Dennis Bergkamp, Tony Adams, Thierry Henry, Emmanuel Petit. Warriors who bled for his teams. And in his final years, one of them turned the criticism outward, in public on television. Petit, the World Cup-winning midfield engine of the double-winning side, openly questioned why Wenger never opened the door to his own club legends. Why didn't Arsène open the door to Thierry Henry, Dennis Bergkamp, Patrick Vieira, or Tony Adams? He asked. He argued Wenger built statues to his history, but refused to bring that history back inside the building to help the club evolve. And then he dropped the bombshell about his old teammate Vieira, Arsenal's greatest ever captain. After hours of conversation, Petit said Vieira was really disgusted by Arsenal and Arsene's attitude. Why did this hurt? Because these weren't outsiders. These were the men who won everything with him. Petit even suggested Wenger simply couldn't imagine a former player criticizing him openly, that the loyalty ran only one way. For a manager who prized family above all, watching his own dynasty grow cold was perhaps the deepest cut of the entire chapter. The enemy he could never beat. We finish with the most volatile relationship of Wenger's life. And it wasn't even a player. José Mourinho. The conflict began the moment Mourinho arrived at Chelsea, and it never cooled. When Wenger dared to comment on Chelsea's dip in form, Mourinho branded him a voyeur who liked to watch other people. Years later, he went further, sneering that Wenger was a specialist in failure for going over a decade without a league title. At the start, Wenger held his composure, the professor rising above it, refusing to be dragged down. But this feud had no ceiling. In 2014, on the touchline during a Chelsea-Arsenal match, the tension finally exploded into the physical. Wenger actually shoved Mourinho near the technical area, and the two men nearly came to blows. This is the story of how even the calmest man in football met someone who could pull him under. The two never saw eye to eye on anything, seizing every chance to insult the other, relevant or not. Mourinho needled him about pressure, about trophies, about failure, and for years, Wenger simply could not get the better of him on the pitch. By the end, it had become one of the defining rivalries of an era, proof that beneath Wenger's serenity was a competitor who could be provoked, wounded, and finally pushed into a moment he'd never take back. The specialist in patience, undone by the specialist in provocation. 5 names. 5 very different storms. William Gallas, the captain who sat down and collapsed a title dream. Cesc Fabregas, the son who left and joined the enemy. Gervinho, the fan whose love turned to resentment. Emmanuel Petit and Patrick Vieira, the legends who grew disgusted with his attitude. And José Mourinho, the rival who pushed the calmest man in football to the edge and over it. Each one marked Wenger's 22 years in a completely different way, some with betrayal, some with heartbreak, some with pure, burning rivalry. And through it all, the professor mostly kept his dignity, his silence, and his class. So now I want to hear from you. Which of these clashes surprised you the most? Was it Gallas sitting on the pitch, or Vieira turning cold on the club he once led? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Because in our next video, we're revealing the players Wenger fought hardest to keep and the ones he let slip away and regretted forever. You won't want to miss it.